Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. But this is gonna be a different one. So the next book I'm gonna read is this one, Dead Girls Walking, the Red Volume, an anthology of horror stories featuring female ghosts. And it's an anthology of short stories, some of them flash stories. There are more than 30 in here, and the reason I'm reading it is because I'm in it. I have a story in this one, but I want to read the rest of the stories, and rather than review the anthology as a whole, which is going to feel a little bit weird, I think I'm going to read a story, then pause and, give y'all my thoughts immediately before I move on to the next one, which means that this video will be made up of short clips of me hopefully having cogent thoughts on the different things I read. So, I'll see y'all after I've read the first one. Okay, I finished the first story in the anthology. It is called The Ghost in Apartment 4C by M. Gardner. And I will admit I was a bit nervous when I started it because the first page really felt a little bit undercooked. It's a conversation between two characters, one of whom will become a major character, the other of whom does not. Basically, is just there to be the other side of the conversation. And you can sort of feel that, the other side of the conversation felt a little bit hollow. But once we switched perspective, I really loved this story. Yeah, sure, why not? We are in the ghost perspective for the majority of the story, and it's sweet. And, I got a little bit of Ace love story vibes from it, and it also hit a lot of themes that I've used in several different things I've written featuring ghosts, so of course I'm gonna love it. But also, it had some really good writing, some really strong moments. Etienne? Etienne decided that because I'm talking about ghost stories, I need a black cat with me, but I just want to read one quick passage to you because I absolutely loved it. Let them come. Let them come and try and find me with their spirit boards and machinery. Let them mythologize me, etch my name into the very foundation of the city, make whatever tiny truth story that sounds most appealing to them my legacy. Or let them forget. Let my memory fade. And that's absolutely stunningly beautiful. Overall, I really liked this story. I was a bit nervous because a lot of the times when I read short stories, they sort of come across to me as sort of writing experiments. They often feel like someone had an idea and just wanted to test it out and see how it worked. And by the end, no, this felt like a story, and I really liked that. And I'm glad because it's the first story in the anthology, so I feel like it should be a strong point. Okay, I just finished the second one, which is The Haunting of Lakeside by Dawn Money. And I will admit, this is one of those stories that is exactly what I think of when I think of a lot of short stories, a sort of experiment to see if it would work. And I think it sort of works and it sort of doesn't. It's a story told through entries in a bed and breakfast's guest journal. And, I like the setup. I think it would have worked better if there was more of it. It's a relatively short story, and I just wanted a little bit more expansion on the idea, a little bit more details, and a little bit more of a slower build, because as is, it's like journal entry 2 we're figuring out, okay, there's a ghost named Lily. I really like the idea. Also, the problem with a journal entry as a storytelling tool is, I've read those journals, usually, because, yeah, I am one of the people who does go back and read through the journals when I'm in a hotel that has them, and most of the time it's things like, great stay, Louise, fun times, Joyce, or just somebody writing their names. It's sort of rare to actually find full-length entries where people talk about what happened, and some of the entries I was a little bit like, why would anyone write that? But I do like it. I think it's a fun way to play with different voices, and it's a fun way to play with what bits of information get delivered when, and for a ghost story, that's perfect. Because one of the fun things I love about ghost stories is there is sort of the feeling of you both want an explanation and sort of don't. You sort of want things to maintain a bit of hint of mystery. And that's perfect for a situation like putting it in journal entries. Alrighty, I finished another story. This one was Sweet William Among the Leaves by C.M. West. And I will admit, it wasn't really my kind of story. It was a very classic ghost story, but set in a sort of almost maybe Ren Fairish kind of setting, like old-timey but without a very distinctive idea of what old-timey we're in. And like, if you're looking for a very classic ghost story, it's one for you. It just didn't really hit for me. Okay, this next story was short, so I got through it really quick. It's called To Chase a Great Dane by J. Fox Bedford. And yeah, this one really worked for me. I will admit, in the beginning I was going, this feels like just sort of, I'm not sure why some of the events are in here, because they're all just sort of like interesting, but it feels sort of like the way real life can sometimes feel really disconnected. And then there was a moment that was like, oh, and the twist actually really got me, and I really liked that. Especially in a story that is objectively like 3 pages, and it managed to have a twist. I will admit there was one moment that it made it a bit too abundantly clear to me what was going on. Like, I feel like it did not need that hammer nail on head moment, but otherwise I really liked that one. So yeah, the next story is my story, and since I'm not very well going to review my own story, that would be weird, I'm going to read y'all the first page, just an excerpt, a teaser. Dorian had always been drawn to the sea. Though her family lived nowhere near the beach, she grew up decorating her bedroom with seashells, toy ships, and paintings of lighthouses. She dreamed of going to that weird college where most of the curriculum was taught on research vessels out on the Atlantic. She read Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But of course, she couldn't exactly afford beachside property, and became incapacitated with seasickness the moment she stepped foot on a boat. So Dorian kept her obsession mostly aesthetic, and resisted the urge to buy too many throw pillows with the words, "Life's a beach," embroidered across them. If you want more, buy the Anthology. And read another one, because it is like a paragraph. It's called Renter's Dilemma by Sam Johnston, and yeah, it is one of those very flash fiction stories. It amused me. I will admit I never know what to say about things that are that short, but I'm not sad I read it, so we're good. I finished another story in the Anthology. This one is The Girl in the Side Yard by Steve Bowman, and I really like this story. I feel like it did an absolutely spectacular job of really having the right vibes for a ghost story. It had a lot of real sweetness to it, a lot of real nostalgia, and just enough spookiness to like get you going, okay, I like how much is left unexplained in the end. I always like that in a ghost story. And overall, it was just sweet. But one of the things that really struck me the most is so often when ghost stories feature families, the parents are bad people. And, like, we'll be told, oh yeah, he's a good father at the beginning until the ghosts drive him crazy. But all you see is him picking up his son and swirling him around in the air. Like, that is the movie shorthand for this is a good dad. But I like the fact that, like, this one, no, we really see how he cares about his daughter, how he interacts with her, and, like, yeah, there are moments he's less good than others, but I really like the relationship that was built here before the ghost story even really started. I really liked it. Okay, another story down. This one's About to Run by B. Elizabeth Beck. And I will admit I didn't quite jive with this one. Like, the prose style just didn't work for me. I had a lot of trouble understanding what the story was trying to tell me. And I noticed that the author's bio mentioned she's a poet, primarily, who writes fiction, and I can tell. And yeah, I don't tend to read a lot of very lyrical writing, and it's because I don't tend to really like it. But beyond that, there was also a lot of references to things that I don't have really a point of reference for. So I'm just sitting here like, okay, yeah, those are songs. I'm sure this would be meaningful if I knew the songs, but I don't. So I feel like it might be a great story for someone else, and just it doesn't work for me. Oh, and it was in present tense, and I really don't like things written in present tense. Like, I am not one of those readers that's ever going to stop reading something because of the tense it's written in, but present bothers me. And the next story is sort of a direct contrast. This is The Woman Downstairs by James W. Morris, and this one, I really liked the writing. It was really clear, it was very quick-paced, easy, fun. I got a lot of tone out of it. It made me laugh a couple of times. But I felt like the story wasn't complete. Like, I got to the end and I'm like, okay, this is a good beginning. Where are we going next? Oh, this is a short story, we're done. Oh. So, like, it's a really interesting little tidbit. Like, what I liked about it is somehow, even though there's very little description, yeah, it's stated that it takes place in 1987, and it feels like it takes place in 1987. There's something weirdly nostalgic about this story, even though there's very little, like, directly on the page to give you that impression. So I'd be very interested in reading more by this author. I just wish this story was, you know, a novella. The next story is Frostbite in Spring by Dibyasari Nandi. Sorry, I'm really bad at names. But I really like this one. It sort of plays with the cyclical nature of events and things happening over and over again. It starts really like very traditional, once again, ghost story that it feels like you'd hear on a ghost tour. But I like the way that it uses the repetition. That was a really cool little trick to it. This one was The Portal by Carrie Lee Connell. And this one was a sort of Victorian ghost story, set in 1867, and I will say this, it very much captures the vibes of the time. Definitely was trying to capture the voice of the time. I really felt like the author had done research and knew the history. I will also say, though, it was weird in that the dialogue, I know that the dialogue was trying to capture the voice of the time, which Victorians were not really big about expressing a lot of emotions, but a lot of it is like, the emotions are there. They're just sort of subtle and couched in proper language. And the dialogue of this story was weirdly separated from the emotions, which was weird because it was a really emotional story. Overall, it was just an interesting contrast, but it was a cool little story. Okay, the next story is Gladys the Angry Ghost by Sorter Lucio. This one, the strong suit was definitely the dialogue. There is a beautiful rhythmicality, we're gonna pretend that's a word, to it. It's got a lot of voice in it. I will admit the action passed just a little bit too quick for me, like stuff happened all in like 1 or 2 sentences, and I want a little bit more. But the dialogue provides a lot of, you know, a lot of emotion to the prose. Like, I liked that. That was a really cool element to it. The next story is The Girl in the Lake by Sarah Das Gupta. And don't judge me, I'm not finishing this story. Not at all spoilers, it's page 2. The dog dies, and I'm not in the mood to deal with that right now. Human death? Sure, cool, whatever. Dog death? I'm sorry, the answer is no. Maybe I'll read it later. Keeping me honest, the next one does involve a human death, and this one is called Poor Dead Rose by Ben Amato. And I liked it. It was simple, it was poetic, and it wasn't so poetic that I didn't know what the hell was going on. It used language effectively and interestingly, and yeah, there's not much story there. It's sort of more a snapshot than a story. But it's a page long, so that works. Overall, I thought it was pretty. Like, it was nice. It was a good little ghost story. Full marks. The next one is Revenge is Best Served Cold by Michael Errol, and I'm keeping on my robe because it's thematically pertinent. This is a true horror story in that it is very much grotesque descriptions. There is not really gore, just sort of grotesque descriptions and death and stuff, but also nothing but, like, bad people. Like the ghost, we don't know enough about them to know if they're a good or a bad person, but the only other major character is a terrible person, and we're not supposed to feel any pity for them. And because of that, I was really glad it was a short story, but it was very effective. This next story I really liked. This was called A Good Question by Helen E. Patterson, which I went to school with someone named Helen Patterson, so there was part of me going, is this the Helen Patterson I know? And I still don't know, because the bio doesn't give me that much information. But I really like this story. It's well written, it's well composed, it's got a twist to it. I will say, I think the twist is a little bit cheating. That's not actually a ghost, but it is a spirit, so I'll give it to him. Overall, fun story, well crafted. This is one I wouldn't mind rereading a couple of times. It's good. This next story is The Dying Never Leave Us by Jonathan Wilkins, and this one also really worked for me. It's like all emotion. It's sort of written as freeform poetry for part of it, and more traditional prose for other parts of it. It doesn't bother with pesky things like, you know, logical transitions or giving us all the details of what's happening. We just get the important points. And it has a huge amount of character shoved into a tiny little story. Not that tiny, you know, it's like 5 or 6 pages, so long for this particular collection, but an average-sized short story. And it was lovely. Like, this is an author that I would like to read more by. I really appreciate what he did with this one. Also, it features a slightly romanticized ghost, and a lot of them have, like, it seems to just be a trait of female ghosts. That some of them are going to be sexy and a lot of them are going to be lost loves. But I really appreciated the fact that this ghost was not sexualized at all. And there were characters who were sexualized, but it wasn't the ghost. The next one is The Haunting of a Cracked Window by Lisa H. Owens. And this is another story that I really liked the basic idea of what's going on here. There's some really cool theme work of, you know, thinking somebody has it easy when they really don't. I really actually like the twist of a young person being excited to just have a peaceful ghost life. That sounds lovely. I love the random imagery of the ghost crabs. It's really strong, but they were introduced first, and I was super confused what was happening because there's just a random passing reference to ghost crabs, and I was like, what are ghost crabs? Like, help me out here. I don't know what's going on. And overall, like, I did want a little bit more explanation of, like, how the ghostly shit works. That needed just a hair more explaining. Also, I want the ending to have just a little bit more because I want the old lady to have a little bit more comeuppance. And as is, we're left to imagine comeuppance, but we don't actually get it. And one of the fun things about ghost stories is you usually get to see the comeuppance. So overall, this one, pretty interesting. Okay, this one's hard to talk about. This one is The Mausoleum by Cheryl Owen Wilson. And it's the story about a person who owns enslaved people and treats them horrifically and then gets haunted by one of them. And, you know, it's not trying to be slavery apologistic or anything like that, but it's still a very heavy topic for a ghost story. And don't get me wrong, I think sometimes horror, ghost stories, things like that can be a great way of tackling these incredibly heavy topics in a way that get people involved and emoting for the people involved without it feeling like a lesson. But I wasn't super happy with the abundant use of written out dialect in this story, just because I feel like when you are telling a story about enslaved people, you have to be very careful not to other them and to center the fact that they are people. They were people. And we need to acknowledge their humanity. And it's not that the story doesn't do this. The story's definitely trying to do this. It's just I'm not super fond of using really heavy dialect in this particular case, just because it does other them. But it is a very competently written story. The terrible human being that is our POV character gets his comeuppance, which is nice. It's always good to see bad people punished. I do wish he was punished in such a way that did not involve, you know, the people around him suffering more than he did, but I did like the fact he had a bad ending. Overall, it felt like it felt an awful lot like a story you'd hear on a lot of Southern ghost tours. The next is These Damn Ants Eat Anything by Avren. It's another flash fiction, very short, like I would say that is well under a page worth of text. And it's basically a snapshot, like a lot of flash fiction tends to be. It's a very evocative snapshot. It's somewhat creatively written, like there's just enough interesting things going on linguistically to give it a strong voice. This next one is Sweetbriar by Mary Lou Goodwin, and I loved the idea of this story. Like, this was super sweet. There were a couple of places that it was a little bit not as fully clear as I would have wanted it to be, but that helped with some of the emotionality of it, so it sort of worked for me still. This is another one that I do want a bit more of, but not because it feels lacking, but just because I'm like, no, I want more. This feels like a great idea for a beginning of a longer story. Like, I would read a novella of this one. This one's lovely. One more story for tonight, and I'm ending after this, because this story was a bit depressing. This one is To Know the Truth by Stacy Goebel, and it was very well written, it was solid. There were some moments I was a little bit confused, but I'm pretty sure I was supposed to be confused by what was going on in those moments. It's got a really strong basis of characters. Like, there are 3 main characters here, or actually 3 characters in general, and I have a very strong idea of who all of them are. And it felt really personal. It felt really lived in, for lack of a better word. It's it's sad, though. This is one of the ones that I didn't want to have a sad ending. Like, sometimes in ghost stories and horror, the person who gets comeuppance, you're like, yes, he deserved it. They deserved it. She deserved it. This is... My cat is pushing the camera. This is one of those ghost stories that I was like, she didn't deserve that. But yeah, so, you know, mistakes, bad endings. It's a good place to stop for now. I have like 8 stories left to read, but I think one of them is one of the longer ones, considering how many pages are left. So hopefully I will finish this tomorrow night. Okay, I went for a little walk after finishing that story, because it was a bit of a lot. It's called Into the Abyss by Lisa Cortez, and it's set in the 60s, I think they said it was, but also in Australia, which is cool. I was a fan of, you know, stories set elsewhere, not in my neck of the woods, because that way I get to explore other places. But, I don't know. There's just a lot of really heavy topics in this story, and they're treated rather, like, passingly, which in some ways that's good, because that means you don't get, you know, too emotionally fraught from, you know, a, what is it, like 7-page story, but at the same time it also feels very much like, okay, that was a big thing to drop on us and keep moving. But the characters are really interesting. Shelley in particular, the main character's friend, really felt like a very specific kind of teenager that I know, and I really liked that. But yeah, it was fine. It was another vengeful woman ghost story that may not have been, who knows? But the important thing is, if there's one trend that I've noticed from this anthology, female ghosts are either waiting for a loved one, trying to seek vengeance, usually for sexual violence, or are, you know, seductress. Another story down. This one was The Bloody Princess by Pip Pinkerton, and this one I feel like would work better as a movie. Like, it's very image heavy. There is a lot of visual descriptions throughout the entire story, and it, other than the visual descriptions, is incredibly fast-paced. So, like, I feel like it would work better with the structure of film or visuals. Like, it might work, it would actually make a really good comic as well. It's a lot more gruesome than I tend to like my stories, but I did like the fact that the female ghost for once is not sweet, innocent, or seeking revenge. She's just evil. Because why not? Next story is Death by Lame Jokes by Chandrika R. Krishnan. I really like the idea of this one. This one's really sweet. I will admit, this one felt a little bit to me like it needed a bit of tightening up. Like, there are some elements that are a bit repetitive. But it's a sweet little story about a not at all vengeful ghost, and I absolutely love the fact that it shows a happy couple, which is surprisingly rare in ghost stories. This one is La Fille Rouge, ignore my incredibly bad French, by J.L. Royce, and I really like this one. This one does touch on a lot of topics that have come up a lot in this anthology. There have been a lot of vengeful female ghosts dealing with, you know, the vengeance of sexual things done to them in life, and I like the way this one's handled. It's a bit more subtle, like we get what's going on without it being directly stated. Also, it's got an amazing amount of character in the characters for, you know, a page and a half. Overall, this one, of the women killing the men who assaulted them stories, has been my favorite so far. This one is Behind Raven Black Hair by Jacek Wilkos, and I really like it. It is very much, to me, what flash fiction does really, really well. A single image, basically. A flash photography scene. And it does it very, very precisely. It's got some lovely poetic imagery, but not so poetic you don't know what's going on, which, you know, that's my thing. Poetry's great. I still want to know what's going on. But overall, it's solid. Like, yeah, there's not much story here, but it's under a page. I don't expect there to be much story here. Okay, and I've read the last one in the book, which I feel like this book went out on a high note. This one is called The Wind Will Bring Me Back to You by Elliot Pearson, and I really liked it. It was poetic, but not in an overt way. Like, the actual text is very straightforward, the sentence structure very simple. There's not a lot of superfluous metaphor or anything like that in there. It's pretty straightforward, but what it's describing is just poetic enough that it feels like you're in a living poem. I also feel like it was really emotive, which was really nice. Like, to me, it did what I like ghost stories to do, which is, you know, capture the melancholy, the remorse, the guilt, the, you know, loss of death, and turn it into something a little bit beautiful. I will admit, to me, once again, it's one of those that I feel like ended a little bit soon. Like, I wanted just a hair more from it, but not like continuing on. Just like I want a little bit more time in the original mystery before we get into the more dramatic imagery. But otherwise, A+. I really liked that one. And so, after I've completed this adventure of reading all the stories in this anthology, Dead Girls Walking, the red volume, I will say, overall, I think it's a good anthology. Like, yeah, there are stories in here I'm not particularly fond of, and stories in here that I am particularly fond of. There's a good mix. And a lot of it is just my taste. I'm very particular in what I like in a ghost story, and it doesn't always match what is considered, you know, traditional horror. So, I think it was fun read. I'm glad I'm in it, and I'm very proud my story is in here along with some of these others.